As ready as I will ever be. My phone is on silent. My mind is somewhat switched on.
Are you ready to go? Hey, so welcome to a very, very special episode of Made in India. And I'm May, and with me today, I'm going to do a very traditional introing of a podcast that I'm so genuinely in love with, and I'm so glad that it's part of the Made in India family. I've got the wonderful gals from the Lit Pickers. We have
Supriya.
Deepanjana.
And they introduce themselves. It's like tradition. It's like part of your thing where you guys just say your own names on the show.
I mean, we didn't realize we were starting a tradition, but generally what we do is we pretend to actually introduce the other person. So I'll say, like, I'm sitting with my friend,
Supriya, who's sitting with her friend.
Deepanjana.
And then also sitting with a friend, May.
A mutual friend,
Yeah.
May.
I think the big relief of being on your podcast, apart from, of course, the signal honor it is that maybe this time people will be able to tell Deepanjana and I apart.
I'm not.
This is like a running joke on the Lit Pickers for some
yeah.
reason.
Yeah,
Maybe you can help keep us straight for the public.
For the public, because I mean, it seems pretty straight to the two of us, but we have constantly been told that I apparently sound like Supriya and Supriya apparently sounds like me, and it's something that I just do not understand.
I feel like you both have very, very distinct voices, but I'm also an audio person, so I can hear
That's
the
true. You're a
difference.
professional.
Plus, I also know you guys, so I can tell the difference between. So
But
maybe,
thank you so much for having us on this show. Your show is like one of my favorites for all of the indie music from India and South Asia that you recommend. Your mixtapes are awesome. And anyone who's listening to this doesn't need me to actually tell them that, but I'm going to do it anyway.
Oh my God.
Yeah, you're the best podcaster
Woohoo!
Deepanjana and I know.
Well, I think you guys are pretty awesome podcasters too. And today, particularly, I'm really excited about this. Usually, traditionally, I interview musicians, but today I'm interviewing the both of you. So my usual first question would be, so tell me how the band formed. So how'd you guys come together? Tell me.
The first time Deepanjana and I ever interacted was, in fact, when we were both very young, and she'd just written a book about one of India's most famous painters. And I interviewed her for it via email for the magazine that I was working for.
Because, of course, Supriya was one of like 3 people in the world who read it. Because Supriya reads everything.
That was then.
Is this the Raja Ravi Verma?
It's the Raja
Yeah,
Ravi Verma
it's
book.
called-
And I remember getting her email and feeling properly giddy because, I mean, neither of us had written as much as we would go on to write. But the
Worse luck.
what rubbish. But you know, I'd already known of her writing and I loved the way she saw things. So the fact that she had not only read my book, but also thought it was worth talking to me was like, oh my God, so cool. So yeah, I mean, fortunately, email does not convey high pitches. Otherwise, so
We would never get anything done.
maybe not this one. But so that's how we actually ended up meeting.
It'd be more like, maybe not. Because then we'd both be operating at frequencies no one can hear. But after that, like, weirdly formal professional beginning, I guess we just ended up being friends. It also helps that we're like kind of neighborhood buddies. I mean, we just, we live not too far from one another,
And we also found sort of kindred spirits in one another for book gossip.
Yes.
You know, from also, I think for me, at least, the starting point was being faced with, at that point of time, I used to do a fair amount of book reviewing. And so I would get these books that were being gushed over by a whole bunch of people because you must. And I realized that today. I didn't realize it as much when I was younger. I realized today that, you have to hype up your friend's book, because there's just no system in place to help you actually promote a book. So an author kind of desperately goes around to their friends and says, please hype me up because that's all we got here. All right. It's really sad. Unfortunately, you don't know that until you're in that position yourself and realizing just how much the absence of a system fails you. But anyway, the point is, from the outside perspective for the reader, what you see is just that a whole bunch of people whom you kind of respect and who you think have sense will talk up a book that ends up being really disappointing. And Supriya would be one of the few people who would never be the kind who would be like, this is good or bad. She'd sort of explore why something doesn't work or why it does work. So that was something that I think really drew me to her. And a lot of our conversations would begin with, did you hear about what so-and-so said? And then moving on to brunch and a deeply theoretical debate about how this book should be written.
So, you know what? Because I feel like this is an opportunity for us to marry music and books in some way. Could I ask you guys if you could recommend some books about music? Yeah, because for me, I am a bit of a music nerd. I do enjoy a good read. And so I suddenly realized that I actually haven't read that many books about music, which is, I was like, oh, that's a bit
Well, I
strange.
mean, it depends on what kind of stuff you're looking for. There's been quite a few interesting books in the Indian writing space as well about music. Not, I mean, the most obvious one that comes to mind is Naresh Fernandez's Taj Mahal Foxtrot. Naresh is my ex-editor, which is not the reason I'm recommending the book.
No, it's such a good book. That's actually a book I have read.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a great book.
And it has a CD that comes with it too, right? Like, I
Yes.
think
Right.
it was such an amazing idea, and it's really interesting because I
If
feel
only
like
I
I
had a
learned,
CD player.
well, the old days.
that was then.
That's how you know it's a book that's old, right? It came with a CD.
Came with CD. You know what other books came with CDs? My IELTS exam book.
Right. Encyclopedia used to come with CDs,
Really?
which was also at a time when we didn't have CD players, but that was because CD players were too cool for us to have.
Yeah.
This is like
Yeah,
way
yeah.
back. There was this brief window that we all grew up
Yeah.
that allowed
When
us
the
to
CD was expensive and the CD player was out of reach.
Yeah.
That's true. But yeah, Taj Mahal Foxtrot is definitely something that I've read. It's really good. Any other book recommendations?
I feel sure all your listeners have already read. I mean, there's this subgenre of books by musicians, right? And I think maybe in the last 10 years, kind of the best one that anyone brought out was Patti Smith and her
Just
memoir,
Kids.
Just Kids,
Wow.
which was a lot of. I mean, it was very Patti Smith.
Yeah.
It was very elegant, very poetic.
It's
Not
her
sure-
Mapplethorpe
yeah.
years.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Not sure how I feel about how much of that is like journalistically accurate, but it doesn't
Whoa.
matter.
So I was just thinking about this because earlier you were saying about Taj Mahal Foxtrot, and Siddharth Bhatia also wrote India Psychedelic, which is like I think a little after the timeline of Taj
Yeah,
Mahal
yeah, yeah,
Foxtrot.
Firmly
It's 70s, isn't
60s
it?
and 70s. Yeah.
I haven't read it, but I've heard it's really good.
It is.
I had
really
a chat
good.
with Siddharth to inaugurate the book
Cool.
at a rooftop in South Bombay when the book came out. So
It was fun. I honestly really enjoyed that book because it was just, I also read parts of it out to my mom because it seemed so familiar, and all the bands had names like the Mustangs and the Jets, and they were from all over the place, right? You were either like, and again, all the names seem so familiar, like the guy, Parsi lead singer, or like some, Catholic,
Bohemian Rhapsody
like,
Light.
yeah, it really is. And from everywhere. So you had like the bands that came out from Bombay and bands that came out from Calcutta and bands that came out from Bangalore. And it was so nice to kind of see it. And also at a really difficult time where you can't get guitars and couldn't get amps. And it was just like a
where did the
completely...
records come from?
Yeah,
that
and
he
where do you
listened
do
to? Yeah.
gigs?
Right.
You have like you don't have like amps. You have like a tannoy system in like a hotel or something, and that's where you're performing. So it was really good. Like that was definitely a book that I enjoyed because I felt like I was getting like a Indian indie scene education history lesson.
Not at all indie, but sort of taking off from Supriya's Patti Smith recommendation. For me, I think my favorite musician writing about his life has to be Life by Keith Richards and James Fox. It is, I mean, first of all, considering the amount of drugs Keith Richards has consumed, how he remembers anything is a small miracle, but he does. I remember clearly the book opens with this, I don't remember when, but at some point Keith Richards was arrested for the amount of drugs both on his person and in his person. And he gives you a catalog list, right? Like in the morning, he'd had ta 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 ta, ta, and it's a long list, right? It's like a 10,
Wow.
12 item list of multiple hallucinogenics that are in his system. And he remembers it. It is incredible as a work of James Fox, I'm guessing, is the one who did a lot of the fact checking on
Right.
this.
Maybe went to the police archives and dug up the
Just goes
rap
going through the
sheet.
files and be like,
Yeah.
okay, grass, cocaine, PO. How do you pronounce that? So, but anyway, the point is that aside from the whole drug-addledness of it and all the crazy things that the Rolling Stones have done, and he's really candid, right? Like he says, Brian Jones is whiny and vicious. He says, then there was a great line, I've forgotten the exact words, but basically he said Mick Jagger's solo album was like the Mein Kampf. Everyone has a copy, no one's read it.
Oh, that's so good.
So there's all of this sort of slightly catty and all the kind of crazy exploits that you know the Rolling Stones for, but also it's such an ode to rock music, right? Because this man loves music. He loves the guitar. He loves what sound does. And you feel it. Like there's a long passage of the time that he first heard Elvis Presley. And it transports you. You go back into the head of this 15-year-old boy who's like, wait, you can do that? And that can make me feel this? You know, it's really beautiful. So life is... But really, for me, the lasting miracle of Keith Richards is that he still has a memory. I can't remember what I had for lunch, and he remembers what he had for
me about
drugs like 20 years ago. It's amazing.
How? So, you know what? I recently went to a friend's place and he is music obsessed, and his whole shelf of books is only music books. So it's like biographies. It's like, so I was kind of thinking, when you think about music books, one is the biography, autobiography space of like some of the biggest artists. We kind of touched upon music books that sort of talk about a particular era.
Oh, in that, there's another book that I do want to mention.
Yes.
This book called Sebastian and Sons by T.M. Krishna. I had no idea about this. I mean, my knowledge of Carnatic music is next to nothing. So it's no surprise that I didn't know it. I'm sure this is better known to people who follow the musical tradition. But basically, Sebastian and Sons are legendary mridangam makers. So the fact that the mridangam, this sort of integral part of Carnatic performance, musical performance, this instrument is made by Dalit Christians.
Really?
Sebastian, hello.
Whoa,
I mean,
my
not that that tells you
God.
that he's also Dalit, but, you know. So Sebastian and Sons basically has T.M. Krishna looking into the, like he's been, in his work and his performance and things that he's been writing, he has been sort of looking at the hierarchies, the toxic hierarchies that have informed really this musical tradition and dismantling them in his own way. Sebastian and Sons is one of the bricks in that wall, as it were, the new wall that he's building up.
Subtle, but I like it.
Thanks. You know, can you tell I'm a kid of the 70s and 80s? Anyway, but Sebastian and Sons, I think he interviewed some 40 artists, traced people who make mridangams, have been making mridangams over generations, and yeah, I mean, it's a really sort of, I think it's an important document to have, just to remember that, you know, the great thing about these traditions that we have inherited is that despite the attempts to make them seem monolithic and homogeneous, they're not. They are a hybrid. They're a hybrid of different peoples' legacies, loves, passions, and the more we try to flatten that out, the poorer we are for it. So books like this like really help that, I think.
Out of curiosity, and I'm again saying this because you said that they were Dalit Christians, because there is like with mridangams, they're using animal
Skin,
skins.
yeah.
Is it because of like his
Yeah.
cannery is like
Yeah,
a
yeah, yeah.
particular
Exactly.
caste? Is that why?
Yeah. You, as a upper caste Brahmin, surely you would not touch that animal hide. You'll just sing next to it. Thanks.
Which is also why in Carnatic music you have a caste hierarchy within vocalists, certain kinds of instrumentalists, and percussionists.
God, that's so traumatizing. By the way, I In my boarding school days, I know how to play mridanga, by the way.
That's really cool.
Tarikadadam, tarikadadom. Like, I know how to play. I mean, I'm not great. I learned in...
Were you the girl all the Bharatanatyam dancers came to when they wanted?
No. I'm not like that. I wasn't that amazing. But that's so interesting, though. Because, again, and TM Krishna is someone that I find him really interesting. He's also, I think, like an alumnus of our boarding school that I was like, that I was in. And he's someone that I find so interesting and so fascinating. So I definitely want to read this book. This sounds kind of
cool.
awesome. So I was trying to figure out like what are the different kinds of music books that we exist. Because like looking at my friend's library of books, there is this one of like history and there is one that is a bit like about biographies and now here instruments and maybe like breaking down a particular structure within like classical music. I am also trying to like figure out what are the other kinds of music books that kind of exist.
There's fiction.
Yeah.
People write novels about music and essays about music. In fact, one of the most famous and influential theorists of the 20th century, Theodor Adorno, was famous for writing reams and reams about classical music and jazz music. I mean, it's still like, leftists around the world have like terrible inflammatory arguments about whether he was right about his opinions on jazz or not. I think most people agree that he wasn't. But
the laugh after that is like what's funny. Was he right? Was he not?
I mean, of course, one of India's most famous novelists, Vikram Seth, wrote An Equal Music, which was not set in India, actually, and did not have Indian characters. Let's see, there was a Booker winner who won recently for a book about music, which was Marlon James, who wrote a book called A History of Seven Killings, which is about Bob Marley, a novel I haven't read, but which I've always meant to read because Marlon James wrote the most brilliant essay I have read in the last few years, an unforgettable piece in the New York Times about The Blacker the Berry, the Kendrick Lamar project.
Yeah.
Amazing. He's
This
really
is, like,
wonderful.
really fascinating stuff, man, for me. As you know, besides being I used to be a voracious reader. Now I'm just reader, and voracious has been taken out. I am more of a voracious podcast listener. So I do listen to quite a few music podcasts. So I can recommend some music podcasts that you guys should totally check out.
Come on.
Okay, so the classic one that I think is a great gateway music podcast is Song Exploder.
It is the only music podcast I've heard apart from yours.
Thank you. And Hrishikesh Hirway is amazing. And I honestly think that he is the prince of editing because the way he sort of breaks down the music and you sort of have what they call the stems of the tracks, right? Which is like when you pull apart the track, you get to hear different parts of it and where they were recorded and how they were recorded. And some of my favorite episodes was he did one with Lindsay Buckingham for a Fleetwood Mac song called Go Your Own Way. And it was so good. And it's like, I love Lindsay Buckingham because I really love his like sort of finger plucking style of guitar. So that was like one of my top favorites. There is another one with Questlove because again, he's amazing. And it's a song that he did for a soundtrack of a film. And he breaks that down. And it's like, it's so nice to hear musicians, because I do that anyway, like to listen to artists break down music. But it's so nice to sort of get the origin story, because I think music has this ability that regardless of language or where it's from, like I think you feel the music more than you just hear it. Another one that I would highly recommend is a show that Sean has always, like, he was the one who recommended this to me, and it's called Switched on Pop, and it's by Vulture. And it's basically the two hosts, a musicologist Nate Sloan and a songwriter called Charlie Harding. And so the two of them kind of break down kind of trends in pop music. So it's fascinating to me because I do like pop, and it's really interesting for me to understand how that sort of happens. So like some of the episodes that they've talked about why some of the most popular, Billboard chart, topping songs by men they all sing in falsetto. So a lot of like, so then they did it, not just them, but they did this entire thing about understanding
There we go.
all of them. Justin Timberlake, Justin Bieber, they all mainly sing in falsetto. Some of the most, so then they did this entire, this understanding of like falsetto in pop music and men singing in falsetto. And so I don't mind it. So Usher, like all of the great R&B pop
I
singers.
don't get
and
it.
like,
I genuinely don't. Just what is wrong with having a voice that comes from your ankles, damn it? Cue in the National.
there you go. I was waiting for that to come. I was like, when is she going to start talking?
No, that's not true.
about-
There are times when I have listened to people who are not the National. Occasionally.
like-
But yeah, I just do not. I like deep voices. One of my major gripes actually with the Hindi film music, which I love,
Yeah.
is the women singing in falsetto. This tradition that really sort of gathered strength with the rise of Lata Mangeshkar, who has a wonderful falsetto.
Yeah.
But not most people, I mean, it just doesn't work for most people. And this, when you listen to older playback singers like Shamshad Begum, like these wonderful throaty voices, like with proper character, and it's all gone for something that's high pitched and flat in a weird way. Like Lata Mangeshkar is not flat at all. She could bring fantastic dynamism to the falsetto, but Justin Timberlake and Justin Bieber, no. Okay.
Fair, but I do know that when you take in a lot of R&B singers, a lot of them do sing in falsetto, and I don't have a problem with falsetto if it's done well, because you also, for me, so these are the kind of trends that I love talking about, right? Like another one, which was an incredible episode on Switched on Pop, was they were talking about how technology is changing songwriting. So, for example, now the chorus is like moving from how your opening of your song is like changing because you need to hook a listener in like in the first 30 seconds, because also the way artists get paid, they get paid based on how long someone streamed your song for. So yeah, and there's some artists, I mean, some of it's been happening for a while. Like it's not like this is particularly only now that you have streaming music. There were artists that were doing this in like the 90s. So I think they quoted Dave Grohl, who said, "Don't bore us, get to the chorus." Like was like something that he'd said. Aerosmith, most of their songs started with the chorus. Pink is so Pink was their song. So every song, Janie's got a gun. So like literally the title of the song was like the first line of, so there are certain artists that did this anyway. But yeah, so I would highly recommend Switched on Pop because it's just a great deconstruction of understanding pop trends, which I'm super fascinated by.
I think we're in the golden age of, music theory for the people. And a big part of that is because of podcasts and video series where people kind of cut the clutter through the celebrity that builds up pop music and actually gets down to why we like the music that we like or why we listen to it. Vox's Earworm series, right? Which I bet a bunch of your listeners have checked out. I think it's a video series.
It's a video series, yeah.
That does that sort of really well. So it'll lay bare what it is that makes Justin Bieber's Sorry or Despacito so compelling.
So I'm always fascinated with that breakdown and understanding of music because, like I was saying before, one of the things is that there is something that is unbelievably intangible about music. Like you can't always explain exactly what it was about. Like even I've done this so many times with musicians themselves. Like, why has he picked like this set of notes in this part of the chorus, and what's a pre-chorus, and why does it come like this? And so it's...
So what's really interesting, and I know this from a book, naturally, if you show a neurologist the scan of a musician's brain and a non-musician's brain, a neurologist can tell a musician's brain. Facts like this and other such trivia may be found. No, seriously, it was one of my favorite findings in Oliver Sacks's book Musicophilia, which is a series of essays. Sacks, one of the most wonderful science writers, neurologists, and generally just a magnificent writer, right? So Musicophilia is essentially about the impact of music on the brain. And it's a series of essays looking at just various ways that music impacts personality and neural functions. And it's got stories like, a neurologist can look at a brain and tell you if that's a musician's brain scan or a regular non-musician's brain scan.
That's amazing.
Then another one of the stories that I thought was amazing was there was this composer called Dmitri Shostakovich. He ended up with a piece of shrapnel in his head, which he refused to have removed. Could have had it removed, but did not, because he said that when he tilted his head at an angle, he could hear music, which he added to his compositions.
What?
Yeah.
That's
So,
crazy. It's
so
like an
it's-
antenna? Like a...
Who was he listening to? What is going on? I mean, there's certain things obviously you cannot explain.
Yeah.
But historically, music, we've sort of, we've understood it as something that comes from elsewhere, that we listen in on it. It's music of the gods. It's a message from nature. Like different outside energies seem to produce it. And yet, in a way, it's something like magic by your brain cells.
Yeah, a lot of artists talk about it as channeling like something from the outside in. And yeah, a lot of it happens of like, and again, these are things that I find fascinating because I think like melancholy is something that definitely informs so much music. And I think it's some of the saddest heartbreak songs that end up honestly winning Grammys. Like I've literally I went through the whole every one of those albums was written like when blah blah had some heartbreak, whether it was Adele or Sam Smith. Like they'd just broken up with someone, they literally wrote a song about it, and that was it. So I'm really excited. I got a chance to recommend some cool music podcasts. You guys, I've got so many books to read right now. I'm so excited. I need to find out about Sebastian and Sons. I need to find out about this Oliver Sacks book. I have not read it. And then now Patti Smith's book. I was so many.
Yay.
I'll never have any time. I need a vacation just to read the books. Do you think I should do that?
Yes.
A book vacay?
Yes.
I highly recommend it.
I want
you.
one also.
We should all go on a book vacay. So exciting to have you both on my show. And the reason why is that we're launching the next season of the Lit Pickers.
Drum roll, mridangam roll.
Mridangam roll. Come on. But yeah, so Lit Pickers is back, and we're going to be releasing an episode every week. And what are the kind of things we're talking about this season for Lit Pickers?
So like I said, Keith Richards remembers the drugs he took 50 years ago. I can't remember what we recorded last week. But we're talking about a whole bunch of very, very contentious things. Some not so contentious things. We are going to disagree on some points.
Politely.
Politely, as always.
Yeah. Because when you eat brunch with someone, you can't be impolite with them.
Fair.
To misquote Rajashri Productions, the podcasters who brunch together stay together.
Nice.
We took off from the pandemic and recorded an episode about books that are set in our immediate surroundings, and also books that helped take us away to lands distant. We talked about romance novels, which is kind of an abiding interest of ours. We talked about children's authors.
We talked about Enid Blyton.
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
We talked about men.
We did talk about men.
That's a fun
They
one.
should be grateful, to be honest.
I know. The fact that they got featured on this, they're lucky. Yeah.
I hope some listeners will enjoy that.
I'm sure they will. So yeah, so please do check out the Lit Pickers, any podcast app of your choice. And thank you so much to Supriya and Dipanjana for being on Made in India.
Thank you for
Thank
having
you
us.
for this giant honor.
I know. So when's the album coming out next?
Well, whenever it is that the podcast drops.
Thank you guys.
For a 40-something-year-old to say drops.